Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history of the Ozark Mountains. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. The Devil's Den region of the Ozark Mountains has long held a reputation for swallowing people whole. In autumn of 1891, 12 experienced mountain men ventured into its depths for what was supposed to be a routine winter hunting expedition. Only 3 would ever emerge again. What follows is the account of what has come to be known as the Lost Camp of Devil's Den, a tragedy that local residents still speak of in hushed tones over a century later. The official records stored in the Washington County Historical Society archives list the names of these 12 men: Jeremiah Blackwood, 53, his brother Thomas Blackwood, 49, Samuel Whitaker, 61, Elias Cooper, 34, Frederick Reynolds, 42, Cornelius Hayes, 45, Jacob Turner, 39, Isaiah Matthews, 51, Benjamin Crawford, 37, Wilbur Holloway, 44, Josiah Miller, 36, and Ezekiel Thompson, 47. All were experienced outdoorsmen, trackers, and hunters from various settlements around the Ozarks. The 3 survivors, Thomas Blackwood, Elias Cooper, and Benjamin Crawford, would never fully recover from what they experienced during those 68 days in the wilderness. The expedition was meant to be straightforward. The men would establish a base camp in the valley locals called Devil's Den, approximately 23 miles west of Fayetteville, Arkansas. From there they would hunt, trap, and gather enough provisions to sustain their families and sell in town through the harsh winter months. Such expeditions were common in those days, as prolonged hunting trips were often the difference between survival and starvation for frontier families during the winter. What made this trip different was a peculiar opportunity. According to Jeremiah's correspondence with the local postmaster, dated August 14, 1891, these caves supposedly contained game so plentiful that a man could feed his family for months with just 1 week's hunt. The letter, preserved in the county records, shows Jeremiah's enthusiasm about this prospect, though he mentions a curious detail. The previous owner of the map had reportedly abandoned it after returning from a solo expedition, a changed man unwilling to speak of what he had seen. The historical context surrounding this expedition bears mentioning. Jeremiah Blackwood, the expedition leader, had come across an old trapper's map indicating a previously unexplored network of caves and valleys deep in the western reaches of Devil's Den. The Arkansas Ozarks in 1891 were still considered frontier territory in many respects. While settlements had been established throughout the region, vast stretches remained largely unexplored and unmapped. The topography of the Ozarks, with its dense forests, winding valleys, limestone caves, and sudden ravines, created natural barriers to comprehensive exploration. Local folklore was rich with tales of people who ventured too deeply into certain areas and never returned, or who came back not quite right, as local parlance described it. Jeremiah Blackwood was well known in Washington County as an experienced guide and hunter. County records show he had led similar expeditions annually for nearly 20 years without incident. His brother Thomas, though equally skilled, was known to be more cautious and deliberate. According to statements from Thomas's wife, Sarah, preserved in a series of letters to her sister, the brothers had disagreed about the wisdom of this particular expedition from the beginning. Thomas came home troubled after Jeremiah showed him the map, Sarah wrote, in a letter dated September 2, 1891. He says there's something not right about it. The landmarks don't align with any known part of the mountains, yet the starting points are familiar. Jeremiah is convinced it will lead to their fortune, but Thomas feels it may lead to their ruin. Still, brotherly loyalty runs deep, and he will not let Jeremiah go alone. The 12 men departed from the town of Winslow on September 28, 1891, According to the diary of Samuel Whitaker, which would later be found among the few recovered possessions, the journey began under favorable conditions. The weather was mild, the men were in good spirits, and they moved at a steady pace through familiar territory. The diary entries for the first week describe routine activities, setting up camps each evening, hunting small game, and following the trail markers left by previous explorers. Whitaker's diary provides valuable insight into the group's dynamics. Jeremiah and Thomas Blackwood were the natural leaders, with Jeremiah making final decisions after consulting his more contemplative brother. Samuel Whitaker, at 61, was the eldest and served as the group's record keeper and medical attendant, having acquired rudimentary medical knowledge during the Civil War. Frederick Reynolds and Jacob Turner were expert trackers, while Elias Cooper and Benjamin Crawford were the youngest and strongest, tasked with much of the physical labor. Cornelius Hayes was known for his skill with traps and snares, Isaiah Matthews for his knowledge of edible plants, Wilbur Holloway for his marksmanship, Josiah Miller for his ability to preserve meat, and Ezekiel Thompson for his uncanny sense of direction. It wasn't until October 5th, when the party reached the outer boundaries of Devil's Den, that the tone of Whitaker's entries begins to shift. "The trees stand differently here," he wrote. "They grow at angles that make no sense, as if reaching away from the ground rather than toward the sky." Jeremiah says, "This is just how the wind shapes them in this valley, but I've never seen anything like it in 40 years of mountain life." The entry continues, "The air feels different as well, heavier with a peculiar metallic taste that coats the tongue. Several of the men have complained of headaches since we entered this valley yesterday. Only Jeremiah seems unaffected, perhaps even invigorated. He moves with the energy of a man half his age, always pushing us forward, always looking toward the cave entrance visible on the western ridge. I find myself avoiding looking directly at that dark opening. Something about its shape disturbs me in ways I cannot articulate." The subsequent entries detail the establishment of their permanent camp in a clearing surrounded by dense forest, approximately half a mile from the entrance to the unexplored cave system. The men constructed rudimentary shelters, set up smoking racks for preserving meat, and began their hunting routine. Initially, game was plentiful, just as the map had promised. Whitaker's diary notes that on October 8th alone, the party managed to bring down 6 deer, dozens of rabbits, and more wild turkeys than they could count. "The animals seem to gather here," Whitaker observed, "almost as if drawn to this place. Jeremiah says we've been blessed with good fortune, but something about it feels unnatural." A concerning observation appears in the October 9th entry. "Today, while dressing a buck, Frederick discovered an abnormality in its eyes. The pupils were not round but oddly shaped, almost rectangular. When mentioned to Jeremiah, he dismissed it as a birth defect. But I have seen many deer in my lifetime and never such a thing." Later, Elias reported finding similar irregularities in 2 rabbits he was preparing. We agreed not to mention it to the others to avoid unnecessary concern. The next few diary entries document increasing success in their hunting, but also the first signs that something was amiss. On October 12th, Whitaker wrote about odd animal behavior. "The creatures don't flee as they should. They stand and watch us, sometimes walking toward our guns rather than away. Frederick shot a buck today that walked directly up to him and stood still, as if offering itself." The entry for October 15th mentions the first of what would become a recurring phenomenon. "The silence here is wrong. There are moments when all sound simply stops. No birds, no insects, not even the wind in the leaves. It happened again today while we were dressing a deer. For nearly 10 minutes, absolute silence. The men won't speak of it, but I can see it troubles them." Whitaker also began documenting changes in the group's behavior. "Jeremiah spends hours each evening staring toward the cave entrance," reads the October 17th entry. "When addressed, he sometimes takes several seconds to respond, as if returning from some distant place. Thomas watches his brother with growing concern, but says nothing. The two have always been close, communicating often without words, but I sense a distance growing between them now. The October 19th entry describes the first overt tension in the camp. An argument broke out between Cornelius and Isaiah over a missing knife. Harsh words escalated to shoving, behavior entirely out of character for both men. Jeremiah intervened with unexpected force, striking Cornelius across the face. The sudden violence silenced everyone. Afterwards, Jeremiah apologized, claiming the pressure of leadership had momentarily overwhelmed him. The incident was apparently forgotten, but the mood in camp has shifted. Men speak less and watch more. The first human casualty occurred on October 21st. According to both Whitaker's diary and later testimony from the survivors, Josiah Miller failed to return from a solo hunting excursion. The men organized a search party, but found no trace of him beyond a single boot print near the cave entrance. "It's as if the earth opened up and swallowed him," Whitaker wrote. Jeremiah insists we continue with our purpose here. Too much is at stake for our families to return empty-handed before winter. The October 22nd entry reveals more troubling details. We searched again at first light. Thomas led a party west, while Jeremiah took men eastward. I remained at camp with Benjamin, who had twisted his ankle yesterday. Jeremiah's group returned mid-afternoon, subdued and empty-handed. Thomas's party returned at dusk. While the others reported no sign of Josiah, Thomas took me aside and confided that they had found something disturbing: Josiah's hunting knife embedded in a tree trunk nearly 8 feet above the ground, with no obvious way it could have been placed there. Thomas removed it, but told no one else, not even Jeremiah. I don't know why, he told me, but I felt it best not to mention it. Whitaker's entry for October 23rd notes another unsettling development. Several men reported unusual dreams last night. Jacob, Ezekiel, and Frederick all described dreaming of standing at the cave entrance, hearing voices calling them by name from the darkness. Jeremiah seemed unusually interested in these accounts, questioning the men closely about what the voices promised them. His intensity disturbed me. Later, I saw him writing in his own journal, which he keeps separate from the official expedition log. He guards it jealously. The diary entries become increasingly erratic after Miller's disappearance. Whitaker describes strange sounds echoing from the cave system at night. Not animal, not human, but something in between. He notes growing tension among the men, particularly between the Blackwood brothers. Thomas wants to leave. The October 25th entry states, "Says this place is wrong. Jeremiah won't hear of it. They nearly came to blows tonight." On October 27th, Whitaker recorded a disturbing incident involving Frederick Reynolds. Frederick wandered from camp before dawn. Benjamin found him standing at the edge of the clearing, staring into the forest. When approached, Frederick seemed not to recognize him, speaking in what Benjamin described as words that weren't words. It took several minutes to coax him back to camp. Frederick has no memory of the episode and became agitated when questioned about it. The October 29th entry describes deteriorating conditions within the camp. Our supplies remain plentiful, but several men have begun refusing to eat the meat we've collected, claiming it tastes wrong. I must admit I've noticed an unusual metallic flavor myself, though the meat shows no signs of spoilage. Thomas, Benjamin, and Elias now hunt separately from the main group and prepare their kills away from the central camp. The division is becoming more apparent daily. Jeremiah watches this development with an expression I cannot read. On October 30th, 3 more men, Cornelius Hayes, Isaiah Matthews, and Wilbur Holloway, ventured into the cave system to explore its potential for shelter and additional hunting grounds. According to Whitaker's account, only Matthews returned, emerging from the darkness 3 hours later, alone and incoherent. The diary describes him as speaking words that make no sense, eyes fixed on something none of us can see. Matthews refused to explain what happened to Hayes and Holloway, repeating only that they found what they were looking for. He retreated to his shelter and would not emerge for 2 days. The October 31st entry shows Whitaker's growing concern. Isaiah remains in his shelter, taking neither food nor water. When I attempted to examine him for fever or injury, he grabbed my wrist with surprising strength and whispered, "They sing in the deep places, they sing, and you want to follow." Jeremiah spent several hours alone with Isaiah this afternoon. Whatever passed between them, Isaiah emerged from his shelter this evening, seemingly recovered but strangely distant, and ate his first meal in 2 days. He and Jeremiah now converse quietly by the fire, excluding all others. An unsettling development appears in the November 2nd entry. Thomas discovered strange markings carved into trees around the perimeter of our camp. Shallow, precise cuts forming patterns none of us recognize. Not letters or numbers, but deliberate designs that seem to pull at the eye. They appear fresh, but no one admits to making them. Jeremiah suggested natural causes, perhaps insects or some fungal growth, but the regularity and precision belie such explanations. Thomas, Benjamin, Elias, and I have agreed to establish a watch rotation through the night. The situation deteriorated rapidly after this incident. Whitaker's entries become shorter, more disjointed. He documents increasing paranoia among the remaining men, strange behaviors, and peculiar atmospheric conditions around the camp. "The air feels thick, as if we're breathing underwater," he wrote on November 5th. Jacob says he can taste metal in his mouth. The game continues to be plentiful, but none of us have much appetite anymore. A cryptic entry on November 7th simply states, "Jeremiah knew, he always knew. The map was never the reason." This is followed by a more detailed entry on November 8th. Thomas confronted Jeremiah about the map today, accused him of deliberately leading us here for reasons beyond hunting. Jeremiah didn't deny it. He simply smiled and said, "Some hunts are for more than meat." The other men pretended not to hear, but the camp has divided further. Jeremiah, Frederick, Isaiah, Jacob, and Ezekiel keep to themselves now, often speaking in hushed tones that fall silent when others approach. They take turns standing watch at night, always facing the cave entrance. Not guarding against something coming out, I think, but watching for something going in. On November 10th, the diary records that Isaiah Matthews simply walked into the forest during the night and did not return, despite having recovered somewhat from his earlier distress. The next day, Jacob Turner reportedly began insisting that he could hear voices calling from inside the cave. Voices of people we know, but who couldn't possibly be here. The entry for November 12th states that Turner, against the protests of the others, entered the cave system alone. He did not return. A lengthy entry on November 13th reveals Whitaker's growing suspicions. I managed to glimpse several pages of Jeremiah's private journal today when he left it momentarily unattended. What I saw disturbs me greatly. Detailed drawings of the cave system, made long before we arrived, with notations in a script I do not recognize. References to the calling and the changing. Most troubling was a list of all our names, with strange symbols beside each. Some names had been crossed out, Josiah's, Cornelius's, Wilbur's, and now Isaiah's and Jacob's. I cannot fathom what this means, but I am certain now that Jeremiah led us here with foreknowledge of what awaited. Thomas must be told. The November 14th entry is brief and alarming. Thomas went to confront Jeremiah. They walked into the forest to speak privately. Only Jeremiah returned. He said Thomas decided to check the eastern trapping lines and would return by morning. His expression revealed nothing. Benjamin, Elias, and I do not believe him, but we are now outnumbered. We've agreed to slip away at first light. The most disturbing entry comes on November 15th. Whitaker describes waking to find Ezekiel Thompson standing motionless at the edge of the clearing, staring into the forest. He stood there from dawn until dusk without moving, without responding to any of us, Whitaker wrote. When night fell, he began walking toward the cave entrance. Frederick and Jeremiah tried to stop him, but he fought them with unnatural strength. It took 4 of us to restrain him. He keeps saying the same thing over and over. They're waiting for all of us. The November 16th entry describes a shocking revelation. Thomas returned at dawn, haggard but alive. He told us he'd been watching the camp from the forest edge since his confrontation with Jeremiah. He followed Jeremiah to the cave entrance last night and witnessed something that defies explanation. Jeremiah met with someone, or something, at the mouth of the cave. Thomas described it only as a shape that was wrong in every way. They conversed for nearly an hour, though Thomas could not hear the words. When Jeremiah returned to camp, Thomas noted that he moved differently, as if his joints worked in new ways. "We are making plans to leave tonight, while the others sleep." The November 17th entry is hurried and fragmented. Plans discovered. Frederick confronted us with rifle in hand, claimed we were refusing the gift. Violence nearly erupted. Ezekiel broke free from his restraints during the confusion, ran into cave before we could stop him. His screams echoed for minutes, then stopped abruptly. No one pursued him. Even Jeremiah seemed shaken. Temporary truce established. Jeremiah says he will explain everything tomorrow, says we have misunderstood their purpose here. Thomas does not trust him. None of us do. We'll attempt escape during pre-dawn watch. The diary abruptly ends on November 18th with a hastily scribbled note. Frederick and Ezekiel gone this morning. Jeremiah says we must go deeper into the caves to find them, says our salvation lies below, not above. Thomas disagrees. The camp is splitting. I go with Jeremiah. May God forgive us for what we've done by coming here. The next documented account comes from the testimony of Thomas Blackwood, one of the 3 survivors who staggered into Winslow on December 5, 1891, nearly 70 days after the expedition began. According to the transcript of his interview with the county sheriff, preserved in the Washington County Archives, Thomas, Elias Cooper, and Benjamin Crawford had refused to follow Jeremiah and the remaining men into the cave system. Instead, they began the journey back toward civilization that same day. "We knew something was wrong with that place," Thomas stated in his testimony. "The air, the animals, the way sound behaved, it was all wrong." When Jeremiah started talking about going deeper into those caves, something in his voice had changed. His eyes were different. He wasn't my brother anymore. Thomas's testimony continues with disturbing details. I saw something in his pack the night before we left. A journal, but not the one he normally kept. This was older, bound in some material I couldn't identify. The pages were filled with writing in 2 hands. One was Jeremiah's, the other I didn't recognize. It seemed to be a correspondence of sorts, though I only glimpsed it briefly. There were drawings of the cave system, detailed maps that couldn't possibly have been made without extensive exploration. Yet Jeremiah had claimed we were the first to fully map these caves. Thomas also described a chilling interaction with his brother just before their separation. He took me aside and spoke of transcendence and evolution, said that what waited in the caves would transform us into something greater than human. When I refused, he showed no anger, just a terrible pity. His last words to me were, "You'll understand when you hear the singing." Everyone does, eventually. The journey out was arduous and disorienting. All 3 survivors described extreme difficulty navigating terrain that should have been familiar. It was as if the mountains themselves had shifted, Crawford testified. Landmarks weren't where they should have been. We'd follow a stream uphill for hours, only to find ourselves back at the same spot we'd started from. Elias Cooper's testimony adds another layer of strangeness. The compasses stopped working as soon as we left camp. The needles would spin continuously or point in impossible directions. We tried to navigate by the sun, but often the forest canopy was too thick to see the sky. On the 3rd day, we realized we were walking in circles despite maintaining what we thought was a straight line. It was Benjamin who discovered the solution. We had to walk toward what felt wrong. Whenever we came to a fork or a choice of direction, we had to choose the path that made us uncomfortable, that we instinctively wanted to avoid. Only then did we make progress away from that place. The men reported experiencing severe disorientation, hallucinations, and unexplained physical ailments during their escape. Cooper developed mysterious burns on his hands despite no contact with fire. Crawford suffered temporary blindness that would come and go without explanation. Thomas Blackwood reported that for 3 consecutive nights, he was unable to sleep because he could hear his brother's voice calling to him from the darkness, describing in explicit detail what awaited the men who had ventured deeper into the cave system. He would describe how the darkness changed them, Thomas recounted, how it removed limitations, how it revealed the truth behind reality. The voice sounded like Jeremiah, but the words, the cadence, that wasn't my brother speaking. Each night the voice seemed closer, though we continued to move away from the caves. On the 4th night, I saw a figure standing at the edge of our camp. It had Jeremiah's silhouette, but it didn't move like a man. When I called out, it retreated into the forest. We didn't sleep after that, just kept moving through the night. When the 3 survivors finally reached Winslow, they were emaciated, suffering from exposure, and exhibiting signs of severe psychological trauma. The local doctor, Howard Jenkins, documented their condition in his medical log. The men present with symptoms inconsistent with mere hunger and exposure. Their pupils remain dilated regardless of light conditions. Their skin has a grayish pallor. Most concerning is their collective insistence on certain impossibilities regarding their missing companions. Dr. Jenkins's notes continue. Subject TB, Thomas Blackwood, exhibits an unusual reaction to reflective surfaces, becoming agitated when facing mirrors or window glass at night. Subject EC, Elias Cooper, reports persistent auditory hallucinations, voices calling his name from empty rooms. Subject BC, Yuma, Benjamin Crawford has developed an aversion to darkness so severe that he becomes violent when lights are extinguished. All 3 men insist they are being watched through windows and doorways, have administered laudanum to induce sleep, though TB refuses all medication. A rescue party was organized immediately, consisting of experienced guides and several county officials. According to their report, filed on December 18, 1891, they followed the survivors' directions back to the location where the camp should have been. What they found was perplexing. No signs of human habitation, no fire pits, no shelters, and no equipment. The only evidence that anyone had been there at all was a single hunting knife, identified by Thomas as belonging to his brother Jeremiah, embedded in the trunk of a tree approximately 6 feet above the ground. The rescue party explored the area for 5 days, including a cursory investigation of the cave entrance. Their report notes that the cave system appears to extend far deeper than anticipated, with numerous branching tunnels. Acoustic anomalies make communication difficult, as voices seem to echo in impossible ways, sometimes returning altered or with additional sounds embedded within them. After one member of the rescue party experienced what was described as a seizure of unknown origin while inside the cave, the decision was made to terminate the search. A supplementary report, filed by rescue party leader Sheriff William Hargrave, contains additional details not included in the official account. Deputy Collins was approximately 30 yards inside the main cave passage when the incident occurred. According to those nearest to him, Collins suddenly stopped walking and stated that he could hear them talking down there. When questioned about who he meant, Collins did not respond, but began walking deeper into the cave against direct orders. When physically restrained, he became violent, requiring 3 men to subdue him. Upon returning to the surface, Collins had no memory of these events, but complained of a severe headache and metallic taste in his mouth. Most disturbing was his statement, made several hours later, that someone else is inside my head now. Sheriff Hargrave's report continues. Given Deputy Collins's concerning behavior and the stories related by the 3 survivors, I made the decision to terminate the search operation. Whatever befell the missing men, I do not believe conventional rescue methods will prove effective. There is something fundamentally wrong with that cave system. I have instructed all members of the search party not to discuss certain aspects of what they observed inside the caves, as I fear such accounts would only cause public distress without serving any practical purpose. No further official attempts to locate the missing men were ever mounted. The case file, archived in the County Records Office, was formally closed on January 30th, 1892, with all 9 missing men listed as deceased. Remains unrecovered. A curious addendum to the file, dated March 15, 1892, notes that all personal effects and documentation relating to the Devil's Den incident are to be sealed by order of Judge William Forrester, not to be accessed without express written permission. Judge Forrester's private correspondence, discovered during a courthouse renovation in 1937 but promptly resealed, reportedly contained a letter to the governor explaining his decision. The accounts provided by the survivors and members of the search party suggest phenomena beyond our current understanding. To prevent public panic and preserve the reputation of all involved, I have ordered all materials relating to this case sealed. I believe this decision serves the public good, as no productive purpose can be served by circulating tales of impossible occurrences that would only inspire fear or, worse, curiosity that might lead others to investigate that cursed place. The 3 survivors never fully reintegrated into society. His landlord in Portland reported that Crawford maintained unusual habits throughout his life, including sleeping only during daylight hours and surrounding his bed with mirrors to see them coming. Crawford's death certificate lists the cause as heart failure, though contemporary accounts suggest he died during a violent episode in which he claimed they had finally found him. Elias Cooper remained in Winslow but suffered from what contemporary accounts described as melancholia and nervous exhaustion. He was eventually committed to the Arkansas State Lunatic Asylum in 1895, where he remained until his death 3 years later. According to town records, Benjamin Crawford left Arkansas entirely, relocating to Oregon, where he lived as a hermit until his death in 1913. His medical records, partially preserved, document his persistent claims that they're still alive down there, but they aren't men anymore. Dr. James Thornton, Cooper's attending physician at the asylum, kept detailed notes on his patient's deterioration. Subject maintains consistent delusions regarding his former companions. Claims they have been transformed by some force within the caves. When pressed for details, subject becomes highly agitated, often repeating the phrase, "The angles are all wrong now." Most concerning is his insistence that he can sometimes hear them calling through the asylum walls, particularly at night. Subject has made 3 attempts to respond to these perceived communications by carving symbols into the walls of his cell using his fingernails. The symbols match no known alphabet or pictographic system. Thomas Blackwood perhaps fared the worst of all. Town records indicate he became increasingly reclusive, refusing to speak about what happened. In 1894, he built a cabin on the outskirts of town, where he reportedly lined the walls with mirrors to ensure nothing could approach unseen. Local accounts describe him becoming increasingly paranoid, convinced that his brother was watching him from reflective surfaces. Sarah Blackwood, Thomas's wife, eventually left him in 1895, taking their children to live with her sister in Missouri. In a letter to the local pastor, she explained her decision. "He is not the man I married. Whatever happened in those mountains took my husband from me as surely as it took his brother." He spends his nights watching the windows and doors, claiming that Jeremiah visits him. He speaks of the changing and warns that it's spreading. Last week, he burned all of Jeremiah's possessions that remained in our home, claiming they were contaminated. When I asked what he meant, he said, "They use objects as anchors to find their way back. I fear for the children's safety now, not that Thomas would harm them, he is gentle still, but that whatever haunts him might turn its attention to them next." On the anniversary of the expedition's departure, September 28, 1896, Thomas Blackwood took his own life. The note he left behind contained only 5 words, "He's found me at last." The coroner's report notes that mirrors in Blackwood's cabin had been systematically shattered, and the walls were covered with the same strange symbols that Elias Cooper had reportedly carved in his asylum cell. Interest in the case briefly resurfaced in 1921 when geologist Martin Kemp led a scientific survey of the Devil's Den region. According to his published findings, the cave system was far more extensive than previously documented, with certain passages exhibiting unusual electromagnetic properties that interfere with compass readings and create persistent audio distortions. Kemp's team ventured approximately 1 mile into the main cavern before turning back due to unstable conditions. In his published report, Kemp noted several scientific anomalies. The limestone composition of the caves is consistent with others in the region, yet exhibits unusual properties. Certain sections appear to absorb sound rather than echo it. Electromagnetic measurements show inexplicable fluctuations that correlate with no known geological phenomena. Most interesting is the water that seeps through the cave walls. Chemical analysis shows elevated levels of compounds that should not naturally occur in this geological setting. Further study is warranted, though funding limitations prevented more extensive investigation. In his personal journal, which wasn't published until after his death, Kemp wrote about an unsettling discovery made during the expedition. Deep within the cave system, in a chamber that showed signs of previous human presence, they found what appeared to be a camp setting. 9 sets of equipment arranged in a perfect circle, facing inward, around a fire pit that contained ashes later determined to be approximately 30 years old. In the center of the circle lay a journal, which Kemp removed from the site. The journal was reportedly Samuel Whitaker's diary, continuing beyond the final entry previously recovered. Kemp wrote that after reading its contents, he sealed it in a metal box and personally delivered it to Judge Forrester's successor with instructions that it remain unopened. Kemp's private journal entry from October 12, 1921, reveals his disturbed state of mind following the expedition. I cannot in good conscience include our most troubling discoveries in the official report. Science has no framework for what we encountered in the deepest chamber. The circle of equipment was disturbing enough. The packs and tools showing no signs of the 30 years that had supposedly passed, the arrangement too perfect to have occurred naturally. But what we found beyond that chamber defies rational explanation. The entry continues. In a narrow passage leading downward, we discovered what appeared to be organic material integrated with the cave walls. Not fungal growth or bacterial colonies, but something with structure and apparent purpose. Dr. Collins collected samples despite my misgivings. That night in camp, the samples changed. They moved independently, forming patterns similar to the symbols we had observed carved into various surfaces throughout the cave system. By morning, the samples had disappeared entirely, leaving only stains on the collection containers. Collins has complained of headaches and unusual dreams since handling the material. I have advised him to seek medical attention upon our return to civilization. Kemp's final entry regarding Devil's Den, dated October 20th, 1921, is brief but chilling. Collins has not reported for work in 3 days. His landlady reports he left his boarding house before dawn on the 18th, taking minimal possessions. He left a note stating only that he was returning to the deeper place. I have reported his disappearance to local authorities, but have not disclosed the full circumstances of our expedition. I believe some knowledge is too dangerous to preserve. The journal has been sealed and delivered to Judge Harrison with explicit instructions. My formal involvement with the Devil's Den investigation ends today. May God forgive me for what I've learned and for what I've chosen to conceal. The most recent documented investigation occurred in 1952, when historian Edward Barnett attempted to locate the sealed records and Whitaker's complete diary for a book on Ozark mysteries. According to correspondence in the University of Arkansas archives, Barnett was informed that all records relating to the incident had been misplaced during courthouse renovations in 1937. Barnett's subsequent inquiries to various government departments were met with inconsistent responses, ranging from denials of the record's existence to claims that they had been destroyed in a fire. Barnett's research notes, preserved in the university archives, document his growing frustration. The inconsistency of official responses suggests deliberate obstruction rather than bureaucratic inefficiency. When pressed, Clerk Wilson at the County Records Office admitted that certain files related to Devil's Den had been removed on orders from higher authorities in the 1930s. When I asked who had issued these orders, Wilson claimed not to know, but his demeanor suggested fear rather than ignorance. Barnett did manage to track down one final piece of the puzzle. An elderly resident of Winslow named Martha Hayes, the niece of Cornelius Hayes, one of the men who disappeared in the caves. In a recorded interview conducted in 1953, Hayes claimed that her father, Cornelius's brother, had received a letter postmarked 1897, 6 years after the incident, that appeared to be from Cornelius. The letter reportedly contained only a strange symbol and the words, "The deeper we go, the more we understand. Don't look for us. We see everything now." In the recorded interview, Hayes elaborated, "Father never spoke of Uncle Cornelius after the letter came. He burned it immediately, but I saw it first. The handwriting wasn't right. It looked like Uncle's, but as if someone who had only seen his writing was trying to imitate it. And the symbol, I've never forgotten it. Like an eye, but with too many angles. Father said it was a warning, not an invitation, though the words suggested otherwise. Within a week of receiving that letter, Father moved us all to Missouri. Said he could feel something watching us through the windows at night." According to Hayes, her father immediately burned the letter and forbade any mention of Cornelius in their home thereafter. The Hayes family relocated to Missouri shortly after receiving the letter, never returning to the Ozarks. Martha Hayes herself refused to discuss the matter further after this initial interview, and when Barnett attempted to contact her again in 1954, he was informed by neighbors that she had gone to stay with relatives without leaving a forwarding address. Barnett's research came to an abrupt end in late 1954. According to a brief notice in the University of Arkansas Faculty Bulletin, he took an indefinite leave of absence for health reasons and relocated to Arizona. His collected notes and recordings were donated to the university archives with the stipulation that they remain sealed for 50 years, a request that was honored until 2004. Barnett never returned to academia and published nothing further on the Devil's Den incident or any other topic. The Devil's Den area has since become part of Devil's Den State Park, established in the 1930s. Park rangers have reported no unusual incidents that could be connected to the events of 1891, though certain areas of the cave system remain restricted to the public due to safety concerns. Geological surveys conducted in the 1960s mapped much of the accessible cave network, but noted several passages that were deemed structurally unsound and were subsequently sealed. However, unofficial accounts from park employees tell a different story. A former ranger, speaking anonymously in a 1997 local newspaper article about Ozark folklore, claimed that certain phenomena within the park remained unexplained. There are places where radios don't work, where compasses spin, where you feel watched even when you're alone. We're instructed to avoid these areas during routine patrols. The official line is safety concerns due to unstable terrain. But the truth is, some parts of those woods just feel wrong. The worst is the area they call the dead zone, about 3 miles from the main cave entrance. Nothing grows there. No animals pass through. Just a perfect circle of dead ground about 30 feet across. It's not on any official park map. In 1968, during renovations of the Washington County Courthouse, a maintenance worker reportedly discovered a metal lockbox hidden in a wall cavity behind an old filing cabinet. According to the worker's statement, he opened the box and found what appeared to be a leather-bound journal and several photographic plates. Before he could examine them closely, the items were confiscated by county officials and never seen again. The worker was dismissed from his position shortly thereafter, and county records show no official acknowledgement of the discovery. The worker, Harold Jenkins, provided his account to the Fayetteville Observer in 1969, though the newspaper declined to publish the story. The box was heavy, made of some kind of sealed metal. Inside was a journal bound in dark leather that didn't look quite right, too smooth with an unusual pattern to it. The handwriting inside was in two different styles, alternating like a conversation. I only saw a few pages, but there were drawings of cave systems and what looked like medical diagrams, but of something not quite human. There were photographs too, old glass plate negatives. One showed a circle of men standing around a cave entrance. Their faces were blurred either by camera motion or deliberately. Before I could look further, two men from the county clerk's office appeared and took everything. The next day I was let go. Budget cuts, they said, but I was the only one laid off. The final piece of this puzzling case comes from an unexpected source. In 1969, a University of Arkansas anthropology student named Robert Keller was conducting research on local folklore when he interviewed an elderly man who claimed to be the grandson of one of the park's first rangers. The man, who requested anonymity, shared a disturbing account. In 1933, during the early development of the state park, workers clearing a trail allegedly discovered human remains scattered across a remote clearing approximately 3 miles from the main cave entrance. According to this account, the remains were unusual. 9 sets of clothing arranged in a circle, each set containing human bones that showed signs of having been arranged rather than scattered by scavengers. Most disturbing was the man's claim that at the center of this circle, workers found a stone tablet carved with 9 names, the names of the men who had vanished in 1891. The man claimed that his grandfather had been sworn to secrecy about the discovery, and that all evidence had been removed by men from the state capitol who arrived within days. The interview transcript contains additional details. Grandfather said the bones weren't right, not just the arrangement, but the bones themselves. Some were fused together in ways that shouldn't be possible. Others had extra joints or strange growths. The officials called it a hoax, said someone had collected animal bones and planted them to frighten people. But Grandfather had been a medic in the Great War. He knew human remains when he saw them. The tablet was the worst part. The names were carved deep, but around them were those symbols, the same ones that have been showing up carved in trees around the park ever since. Grandfather said after they removed everything, they poured concrete over the entire clearing. It's part of the park now, but nothing's built there. Just a flat concrete pad that's been reclaimed by moss and lichen. They tell visitors it was an old foundation for a ranger station that was never completed. No official record of such a discovery exists, and the story remains an unverified piece of local folklore. However, park maintenance records do show an unexplained 2-week closure of the entire park in April 1933, during which time no visitors or non-essential personnel were permitted entry. The records cite infrastructure development and safety improvements as the reason for the closure, though no specific projects are documented during this period. A curious footnote to this story emerged in 1987 when a hiker reported finding a small metal object partially embedded in a tree approximately 2 miles from the main cave entrance. The object, turned over to park authorities, was described as a pocket watch of late 19th century manufacture. According to park records, the watch was sent to the State Historical Society for authentication and preservation, but no record of its arrival exists in the Society's acquisition logs. The hiker, Michael Delaney, later described the watch in a local history forum. It was silver, tarnished black in places, with the initials JB engraved on the back. The glass was intact, but the hands had fused with the face somehow. The strangest thing was that the metal had partly merged with the tree itself, not just embedded in growing wood, but actually integrated with it, as if the metal and wood had melted together. When I found it, the watch was still ticking, despite appearing to have been there for decades. Today, Devil's Den State Park attracts thousands of visitors each year, most unaware of the dark history associated with its depths. The cave system, where the 9 men vanished, has been officially closed to the public since 1982, ostensibly due to the discovery of endangered bat populations that require protection. Steel gates now block the main entrance, and park literature makes no mention of the events of 1891. Park regulations strictly prohibit overnight stays in certain areas, and rangers are instructed to ensure all visitors have exited the park by sundown. A former park administrator, speaking on condition of anonymity, explained, "There are liability concerns with the cave system. The official reason is unstable passages and protected species, but longtime rangers know the real rules. Never enter the restricted areas alone, never investigate unusual sounds, and never approach anyone seen near the old cave entrance who isn't a uniformed staff member. We lose equipment there regularly: cameras, radios, environmental monitoring devices. They just stop working, or the data they collect is corrupted somehow. After a while, you stop asking questions and just accept that some places in these mountains don't welcome human presence." The three survivors, Thomas Blackwood, Elias Cooper, and Benjamin Crawford, took most of their secrets to their graves. Whatever drove 9 experienced mountain men to venture deeper into those caves, whatever fate befell them there, and whatever the survivors witnessed that forever altered their lives, these questions remain unanswered. The official explanation, as documented in county records, attributes the disappearances to natural hazards and disorientation leading to exposure and death. For those familiar with the full account, this explanation has never been satisfactory. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of this story is the testimony Thomas Blackwood gave to the local minister just days before taking his own life. According to the minister's private journal, discovered among his effects after his death in 1905, Thomas confessed that during their escape from Devil's Den, he and the other survivors had encountered Jeremiah on the trail, alone, emaciated, but moving with purpose back toward the caves rather than away from them. When they called out to him, Jeremiah allegedly turned and revealed eyes that were empty of everything human. According to Thomas's account, Jeremiah spoke only 4 words before disappearing back into the forest. "They're changing us all." The minister's journal continues, "Thomas believes his brother still lives, but no longer as the man he knew. He speaks of transformations occurring in the deep places, of humans becoming vessels for something that has waited in darkness for centuries. Most disturbing is his conviction that whatever process began in those caves continues to spread outward, year by year, mile by mile. They're patient," he told me. "They don't need to hunt. They simply wait for curiosity to bring their vessels to them." I offered what comfort I could, though his account chilled me to my core. That night I dreamt of cave passages leading downward and of voices calling my name from the darkness. I awoke to find I had drawn unfamiliar symbols on my bedside table while sleeping. For those who know where to look, there are still traces of this dark chapter in Ozark history. In the Washington County Cemetery, a memorial stone bears the names of the 9 men who never returned, erected by their families when hope of recovery had finally faded. Local tradition holds that on September 28th, the anniversary of their departure, the stone sometimes feels warm to the touch, even on the coldest autumn nights. More telling, perhaps, are the recurring reports from hikers and campers in the more remote areas of the park, accounts of disorientation, lost time, and glimpses of figures moving just at the edge of vision. Park records categorize these as typical wilderness experiences caused by fatigue, unfamiliar surroundings, or wildlife encounters. Yet the consistency of these reports, particularly the mention of watchers that stand perfectly still among the trees, visible only from the corner of one's eye, suggests something more persistent than occasional misperception. Folklorist Margaret Collins, who cataloged Ozark legends from 1972 to 1995, noted the evolution of Devil's Den stories. What's interesting is how the tales have shifted over decades. Early accounts emphasized disappearances and the dangers of becoming lost. By the 1940s, stories began focusing on changes in those who ventured too deep into certain areas. personality shifts, strange knowledge, obsessive behaviors. Modern accounts often feature what locals call the Watchers, figures glimpsed briefly in the forest that move in unnatural ways. The consistency across generations suggests either remarkable cultural transmission of folklore or an ongoing phenomenon that continues to generate similar experiences. The caves of Devil's Den remain sealed, their secrets intact. Park rangers occasionally report unusual sounds emanating from the blocked entrance during certain times of the year, what one described in a 1957 maintenance log as voices engaged in conversation, though no words can be distinguished. These reports are typically dismissed as the natural acoustics of the cave system, amplifying distant sounds from elsewhere in the park. In 2004, when the university finally unsealed Edward Barnett's research materials, they included a sealed envelope marked, "To be opened only after my death." Barnett had passed away in 1978, having never returned to Arkansas. The envelope contained a single page of handwritten text. I abandoned my research not due to lack of evidence, but because of what the evidence revealed. The pattern is clear to anyone who studies it carefully. The incidents at Devil's Den in 1891 were neither the first nor the last of their kind. Similar cases exist throughout the Ozarks, dating back to indigenous accounts and continuing to the present day. The locations shift, but the pattern remains consistent: exploration, disappearance, transformation of survivors. What changes is the radius. Each incident occurs slightly farther from the original site than the last, as if something is slowly expanding its territory. I have mapped these incidents. The pattern forms a perfect spiral, with Devil's Den at its center. I leave this note for future researchers, not as encouragement, but as warning. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved. Some knowledge is not meant to be obtained, and some places are not meant to be explored. Perhaps it is best that the full truth of what happened to those 12 mountain men remains buried in official records and lost testimony. Some mysteries once understood cannot be forgotten, and in the deeper reaches of the Ozark Mountains, in places where the trees grow at strange angles and silence falls too completely, there are some answers that might be better left undiscovered. As one of the few researchers who has assembled this fragmented history, I leave you with the words reportedly found carved into a tree near where the lost camp was believed to have been, discovered during a 1947 forestry survey and documented in the surveyor's field notes. "We thought we were hunting them. Now we know they were hunting us."